Hey guys, how's it going? This is the Bald Metal Nerd coming at you with another video. And I want to start this video out with a shout out to Chris at Dixieland Farms. You recently posted a comment on a video that I made about heavy metal, and you kind of inspired this video. So I just want to say thanks, Chris, for the idea. What I'm going to name this video is rock dead or dying? And by rock, I mean just, rock and roll, right? I'm not talking, I'm going to leave heavy metal out of the discussion entirely. It's not even, going to be in there. Basically, I'm going to examine kind of the past of rock to the present and what I think the likely trajectory of the future is based on, past and current trends. I'm going to start off in the 60s because honestly the 50s were kind of, the proto years of rock. I mean, yeah, you had Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and all that, but it didn't really become huge as a genre until the 60s. That's when it really exploded in popularity. And of course, in the 60s, you had artists like the Beatles. Led Zeppelin emerged kind of in the later part of the 60s. The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan. Let's see. Who else was big back then? Iron Butterfly, late 60s. Obviously, all these bands that I just mentioned are absolutely household names. And they're still widely played on the radio, and they're still widely loved by a lot of people, right? So that's what they had going on in the 60s. In the 70s, moved on, you had Pink Floyd, obviously, come about in the 70s. Let's see who else was big. Rolling Stones. Let's see. Just bear with me, guys. I'm looking at a list here. The Who, Deep Purple, just CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Again, these are all bands that are still widely known by a lot of people, widely played, widely liked. Moving on to the 80s. Of course, we had, that was, pretty big decade. Def Leppard, AC/DC. I mean, AC/DC has been around since like the 70s, but, they were a big force in the 80s. Guns N' Roses. Let's see, who else was giant back then? Queen, of course. Well, Queen got started in the 70s, but they continued success in the 80s. Just tons and tons of stuff like that, really kind of Bon Jovi, etc. That stuff really came to prominence in the 80s. And again, these bands are still liked by a lot of people, widely known. Moving on into the 90s. You, of course, had the alternative rock explosion, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, U2, Green Day, REM. Some of the Beastie Boys got pretty big that decade. Now, I know not all of those bands are as widely loved as some of the other bands I mentioned, but Rage Against the Machine, of course. All these bands are still, widely known by many people and liked by a lot of people. Then we get into, after the 90s, because obviously we had the genesis of the modern, the modern internet in the 90s. That's kind of when, the mid to late 90s is kind of when the ball got rolling on the modern internet and kind of when everything changed. So, who were the biggest selling artists of the 2000s? Well, apparently the Beatles. Whatever. Eminem, not a rock artist, but anyway. in the 2000s, rock really started to not be nearly as dominant. Linkin Park and Creed were big sellers, and Nickelback. Now let me ask you something. In 20 or 30 years, is anybody going to listen to that crap? Kid Rock. Ugh. I'm just naming rock artists at this point. The point I'm trying to make is those bands, yeah, they sold a ton of music in the 2000s, but in 20 years, is anybody really going to give a crap about those bands? I think not. Now, yeah, we had some big artists in the 2000s, but 30 years from now, is anyone going to talk about Nickelback except say, oh God, Nickelback sucked, didn't they? Yeah. Beyond that, is anybody going to talk about Nickelback, Linkin Park? Are these like the Pink Floyd and Aerosmith of the modern age? I don't think so. I don't think they're going to have that longevity. I don't think anybody's really going to care about them in that amount of time. In fact, most people don't really care that much about those bands now. Let's see. Now, I pulled up a article of, I was thinking, okay, so that's the 2000s. I mean, kind of, yeah, there were some big artists, but honestly, I don't think they have longevity. So I was like, okay, what do we got, the 2010s, the current decade, right? Well, I came across an article called The 50 Best Rock Bands Right Now, Spin Magazine, right? And I read the top 10. I'm not going to read all 50. Number 10 is a band called Swans. Never heard of them until I, read this article. Number 9, a band called Paramore. Obviously not a huge band. I've heard of them. They're not exactly packing arenas. The next one is Titus Andronauticus. Again, never heard of them. Deafheaven, I've heard of them, but not feeling, not huge. Proto Martyr, never heard of them. Against Me, with an exclamation point. Whatever. Never heard of them. Number 4 was Parquet Court. Never heard of them. Number 3, Vampire Weekend. Heard of them, not a fan. Number 2, Sleater Kinney. Never heard of them. And their number 1 is Deer Hunter. Again, most of those bands I had never ever heard. They're not household names. I've never heard of any of these. And I am a big fan of, a lot of rock music. I like rock music, definitely. And I've never heard of most of those bands, the vast majority of them. No idea who the hell they were. And if these are the top 10 bands right now, and a person who is a relatively into rock music's never heard of them, it doesn't bode well for the future of rock music, at least in my opinion. I looked up Wikipedia here where they were talking about rock music in the 2010s, and basically what Wikipedia has to say is rock music has remained popular, though it declined in chart presence beginning in the late 2000s. No kidding. Alongside changes in radio format. These changes were driven by the decline in CD sales and rise of digital signals in the music industry, which prompted a focus to top 40 music. Yeah, no kidding. Rock music has also moved from the hard rock and heavy metal genres that have dominated the genre since the mid-80s. Popular rock music since the early 2000s has become softer and more refined, such as indie rock. Rock was supposedly still the most widely consumed genre in American music in 2014. The decade also saw the return of successful rock artists from the past. Again, this isn't such as David Bowie, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Pearl Jam, Nine Inch Nails, and Green Day. Great, but that doesn't really, that's the past. These are bands that are established. So, yeah, they're talking about some more artists down here that were big this decade, and most don't know who the hell any of them are. Successful alternative bands in this decade include acts such as Imagine Dragons. I've obviously heard of them. They're okay. Linkin Park, Muse, I like Muse. I talked about how much I like them in one of my other videos. Coldplay, Foo Fighters, 30 Seconds to Mars, Skillet, Panic at the Disco, Fall Out Boys, and Paramore. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, are any of these bands going to be, are they going to have the longevity of, the bands from the previous decades? Are they going to influence music like they did in the previous decades? No. No, they're not. There's no way. I don't think 30 years from now anyone will be talking about any of those artists. I could be wrong, but I doubt it. And I think the reason for that is just simply because of how much the music industry has changed since, the advent of file sharing and all that. It totally has just changed the game completely. And I think the days of the, multi-platinum giant rock artists are more or less done for the most part. And I think the only thing that's really going to get a huge amount of attention, the only thing that's really going to become a household name at this point is going to be, lowest denominator, or I'm sorry, lowest common denominator trash, like pop music, hip hop, that kind of shit. Pop country, just awful music, honestly, in my opinion, is going to be what gets the most attention. Rock isn't going to get the attention it used to get. It just isn't, because those days, I think, are just done. Now, I guess to get to the core of the question, is rock dead? No, I don't think so. I think it's still fairly well alive. I mean, I was able to read about a whole bunch of bands and listen to some that I had never heard of just by doing, a really fast search. So I would say probably the overall scene is probably still pretty healthy, I guess. But is it dominating music the way it used to? Absolutely not. I think the days of rock kind of driving the car that is the music industry, I think those days are behind us at this point, and it's going to become, more of a niche genre, for dedicated fans. It's not going to be promoted the way it was. Multi-platinum artists are a thing of the past, bands that have, 40, 50-year careers are a thing of the past. Bands that people remember decades after their careers are over. I think all this stuff is largely becoming a thing of the past, and that's just due to the changes in the air. So anyway, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. Please comment below. Let me know what you think. Make a response to this. Whatever you want to do. If you did enjoy this, as always, please thumbs up, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.